hybrid coasters, hypercoasters, and classic Schwartzkopffs. I'm Rollercoaster David, and this is Coasting into Six Flags Over Georgia. After driving from Carowinds the previous evening, and having a couple of rides before the park closed, I now had a full day to enjoy Six Flags Over Georgia. The park is located near Atlanta, and has a great lineup of 11 different coasters, including 3 manufactured by B&M. There's also some classic Schwartzkopff and Vekoma loopers, a wooden coaster, and since my last visit, a brand new hybrid coaster by RMC.
Today I'm here at Six Flags Over Georgia riding Twisted Cyclone.
Twisted Cyclone opened in 2018, the same year as Steel Vengeance, and so less attention was paid to it than it probably deserved. It replaced Georgia Cyclone, which had been operating since 1990, and I remember enjoying the ride when I rode it back in 2016. Georgia Cyclone was a mirror-image clone of the classic Cyclone coaster from Coney Island, and whilst it was a good ride, the RMC conversion definitely takes it to the next level. The first drop has a slight twist to it. Literally, as it banks to the left before it hits the first element, a reverse cobra roll, which I think is the first of its kind anywhere. This consists of 2 wonderfully floaty 0G rolls linked together with a curve, and after that, it has this really cool element.
It's got this really quite interesting element behind me here, which is kind of like a sideways airtime hill, except it somehow breaks physics, I think. You get like ejector air, but like in the same vertical plane as your body. It's hard to explain, but basically you're tilted on your side, and then you're sort of given ejector airtime in that same angle. It's it's one of those weird RMC elements that just are great fun.
The things RMC can do with physics and coaster track never ceases to amaze me. They definitely have some incredibly talented and creative engineers working for them. I remember experiencing one of the 0G stalls for the very first time, back when I rode Goliath at Six Flags Great America, and it's a great memory for me. I was amazed by how they somehow managed to create sustained floater airtime whilst you were upside down. I'd experienced some good 0G rolls before, but this was very different. It's great that RMC continue to innovate with new elements like this one on Twisted Cyclone, and I'd quite like to see it on future RMC conversions, as sideways ejector airtime is really good fun. The rest of the ride has another 0G roll and a bunch of small but powerful airtime hills before you hit the brakes. It's intense while it lasts, but it's kind of a short ride, actually being the shortest of all the RMC hybrid coasters. It's still great fun though, and a really solid addition to the park's coaster lineup.
So I've just ridden Twisted Cyclone in the front seat, and it's an awesome coaster. The airtime is incredibly intense. The airtime's really strong, the inversions are really smooth, really good fun. It's an awesome coaster.
Twisted Cyclone would also be a bit of a landmark coaster for me, marking an achievement that had required me to visit 5 different countries across 3 continents.
This coaster is actually the final RMC hybrid coaster in the world that I am to ride. So after that, I've now ridden every single RMC hybrid coaster on the planet that's open at the moment. Opening next year should be Aranguazi, which I will hopefully get to ride. But yeah, every single one of them. Not bad achievements.
I'm sure many people want to know which one of these RMC hybrid coasters is the best, and if you watch some of my other videos, you'll know the answer is unquestionably Hakuge. Twisted Cyclone is still a really good roller coaster though, and well worth riding. One thing I'm not so keen on though is the name. Twisted Cyclone is fine in isolation, but with other coasters having names like Wicked Cyclone, Wicked Twister, or Twisted Timbers, it's easy for even experienced coaster enthusiasts to get a bit confused.
Today I'm here at Six Flags Over Georgia to ride Wicked Cyclone.
At least it's a unique name though, which is something that can't be said about the park's tallest coaster, Goliath. On paper, Goliath is a great name for a coaster, symbolising something gigantic and intimidating, but with a total of 7 other coasters having the very same name, it can get a bit confusing. I've now ridden all of them apart from the one at La Ronde, and I'd say of all the Goliaths out there, this one at Six Flags Over Georgia may well be my favourite, and I'd rank it as one of the best B&M hypercoasters too. Its layout is a bit different from the typical out-and-back design of most B&M hypers. The lift hill's built on a higher section of ground to that at the front of the park, and as a result, the second drop on this coaster is actually taller than the first. The ride also contains 6 airtime hills, each of which delivers some great sustained floater air, and there's an intense downward helix that packs in some impressively strong G-forces. The ride maintains a good pace throughout, and before Twisted Cyclone was built, it was my main reason for visiting the park. It's really a great hypercoaster, and one of the top coasters B&M have ever made. Six Flags Over Georgia was the first park in America to open a B&M flying coaster, appropriately named and themed after Superman, and this was the first coaster to feature a pretzel loop also. Amongst my friends, pretzel loops are a bit divisive, and not everyone likes them. They can be a bit too intense for some, with the head first dive down onto your back featuring some really strong forces before you zoom up on the other side. I quite like them, however, and they featured on nearly all of the B&M flying coasters built after this ride. The Superman Ultimate Flight Coaster went on to be cloned at 2 other Six Flags parks, but I'd actually say the original is by far the better version. It's built on a bit of a slope, and as a result the later parts of the ride are much closer to the ground than on the other versions, giving a greater sensation of speed, and there's also an added tunnel near the end. The first drop also feels better too, as you swoop past some trees, really adding to that flying sensation. The park also has its own Batman clone, and whilst there are a lot of copies of this ride around, it's still great fun as an old school forceful B&M invert, and this one was riding quite nicely during my visit. Batman is located in the Gotham City section of the park, which is set to get a bit of a makeover this year, with the addition of 2 new flat rides, although I still thought it looked pretty nice during my visit. It has several DC Comics themed rides, but the most remarkable coaster here is definitely Mindbender. This is quite an old ride, but still a fantastic one. It's a custom Schwartzkopff multi-looping terrain coaster, and packs quite a punch. You get some great airtime at different points of the ride, depending on where you sit, so try to ride this one at least twice, once near the front and once near the back. It's a great coaster, and despite its age, it's still pretty smooth, and absolutely fantastic fun. Prior to the opening of Twisted Cyclone, the newest coaster in the park was Daredevil Dive, which features an impressive 95-degree beyond vertical drop. This was also the first Gerstlauer Eurofighter to feature lap bars, but the design of the train does cause some problems, with the capacity of each one only holding 6 people. When I visited in 2016, this capacity was further reduced by the park adding VR to the ride, which to me was an incredibly dumb decision. Adding a VR headset to a coaster slows down loading and unloading significantly, even from the most efficiently run of parks, and to do it to a coaster with already limited throughput seems like madness. It ended up being the longest ride we waited for as a result of this, and if I'm being honest, the VR wasn't even that well done. Without VR, however, the ride is quite decent, with a lack of over-the-shoulder restraints meaning that there's minimal headbanging and a greater sense of freedom during the inversions. Now there's one ride at Six Flags Over Georgia I'd also like to talk about, as it's something entirely different from anything else you'll find at another Six Flags park. Monster Mansion is a dark boat ride filled with friendly animatronic monsters that really wouldn't look out of place in Sesame Street. There's many interesting scenes and a bit of mild peril, but everything about it is original. It's really strange that this exists at a Six Flags park, where all the other rides are branded as superheroes, and it's the sort of thing you might expect to find at a small independent park, but here it is at Six Flags Over Georgia. Be sure to check it out, as I guarantee you won't have ridden anything like this at another Six Flags park. Another noteworthy non-coaster ride they have is Acrophobia, the park's 200-foot tall drop tower, which has a little bit of a twist to it. Unlike nearly all other drop towers, before the big drop you're actually tilted forward slightly, making you look down before you plummet to the ground. I think this was the first ride to have such a feature, and even today there's still only a handful of drop towers such as Highlander at Hansa Park that do something similar. Another of the park's highlights is the multi-looping Vekoma coaster Blue Hawk. Now I nearly skipped this ride when I first visited the park back in 2015, as this coaster was rather rough and unpleasant, but in the following years it's received a huge upgrade. The biggest change apart from its colour are new trains with vest-style restraints, which actually make it a really good ride. It features a rare butterfly inversion which is only found on one other coaster in the world, and thanks to these modern style restraints, it doesn't really have any headbanging. Its position over the water also makes it look rather stunning, and it had no queue at all when I visited. Similarly, the park's remaining wooden coaster, Great American Scream Machine, also had no queue, and it's actually a pretty good ride as well. There's some airtime and it looks striking with the bright white and blue track, and considering the ride was built in 1973, it's really not all that rough either. Coaster-wise, I've left the worst for last, as the park also has a stand-up coaster, Georgia Scorcher. As a tall person, stand-up coasters generally are quite uncomfy and headbangy, and this was no exception. It looks nice to watch, but the ride experience leaves a lot to be desired. Stand-up coasters in general were never a very good idea, and this one won't convince you otherwise. My time at Six Flags Over Georgia would continue after dark, as my visit coincided with their Fright Fest, with a bunch of haunts and different scare zones. The most interesting haunt by far was the alien abduction one. Rather than the usual jump scare-filled haunt, this one took more of a disturbing, almost psychological horror approach, with some really weird and unusual things going on inside. It definitely had a bit of a creepy vibe going through it, featuring scenes where someone was crushed by a big mincer, a lady that had an alien baby delivered by another alien, and someone that had been torn apart with their head still alive. The effects were actually quite well done, and it was certainly different from any of the other mazes I would visit on this trip. Unfortunately, the rest of the mazes weren't nearly as good, and a lot of them had long queues and felt a bit half-assed in their execution.
And so ends a rather fun day at Six Flags Over Georgia. Twisted Cyclone was absolutely amazing, really good RMC, really good coaster. The haunt wasn't as good as I was expecting it to be. The scare zones weren't as well thought out as other parks. The mazes were decent. The Area 51, not Area 51, the Alien Abduction maze was particularly good. The other ones, particularly the Bloodshed one, was not really that good at all. But I've had fun today. Night ride's got a final night ride on Wicked Cyclone behind me. So for now it's goodbye from me, as I've got to start driving towards Dollywood.
Lackluster haunts aside, Six Flags Over Georgia is a really great park with a substantial selection of fantastic coasters, and Twisted Cyclone is a great addition. The next day would see me visiting Dollywood, where I'd hopefully be riding a coaster that had spited me on my last 2 visits there, Lightning Rod, so be sure to subscribe so you don't miss that episode. For now, I've been Rollercoaster David, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you again in another video very soon.